How do y'all be, man? My fellow hairless makes a blue sea. It's me. We back. I tried to holler at y'all a couple of times, like yesterday. And I just found myself really rambling, because I haven't talked to y'all in a while. Obviously, some of you I talked to you in other places, like Discords and Twitter and other people's channels and things of that nature. But I haven't been on here in a couple of weeks, and y'all know I usually don't go that long. This is as long as I've went without posting in a while. It's just not uh, been an efficient schedule to do such things. So today we just kind of generally chatting it up. I don't think there's anything in particular. Well, I won't say in particular because there are some things obviously I want to discuss in particular with what's going on with the series right now. Because we had a Yonko lose without being defeated. Um, we had some insane stuff with devil fruits, right? Some insane lore piece with the Goro saying things of that nature, and what's going on the rooftop, right? With the phenom from Fuchsia, the rubber band man, to go with the coat and I mean, what? One clap Kaido, because it's one, and you're done, son. Man, it's been a minute since I really got to do that. But because we have so many different plot points, with some of them for the time being seem to be tied up with Big Mamu, it just leaves room for you know how it is, right? For every answer we get like five more questions. So I just wanted to, touch on a few things here and there, and let's get the obvious out the way. And y'all already know, man. Big Mom was one of my favorite characters in the entire series, and it's time for her to go. You know what I mean? I mean, yeah, she didn't die, which was kind of obvious. And I'm gonna get into some stuff about law because this fruit just we know it was gonna be broken, right? When it was introduced to be broken from jump. So, but even with what he's doing, it's still kind of a bit more crazy than what I was thinking that he would be doing. And I'm talking about Luffy too, because I bring up some stuff about what I think is going to happen next. Not necessarily a chapter prediction, but his abilities, what he's actually doing right now, and what could happen in the future just based on what we've seen from Law and Kid throughout this arc, and even Zoro to an extent with hockey. Um, we knew since Big Mom's introduction that it's been hinted at before we knew even thought that she would be a part of Wano, right? It had been hinted at that she was going to be around later in the series, and I understand how some people take that as far as her involvement in Wano. I don't necessarily agree, but I understand it. I don't think they're being illogical, right, with some of the criticisms and how Big Mom's involvement makes things so strange at times. And I don't know, like I said, it doesn't really bother me. Um, but she is annoying at times, and it's not even her; it's what she doesn't do, right? Like even in the fight with Law and Kid, like why weren't they being repeatedly conquerors clapped? Like how Ulti caught it. We talked about that. Boy, characters have flaws, and Big Mom is not exactly. She's not Law, right? She can utilize her abilities very well because how long she's had them. Boy, based on the stuff that we've seen, that is impressive. But skill wise, thought process wise and skill wise, you wouldn't put her in the same tier as Law. I don't even. She's probably close. I don't even know. Actually, I don't know where to put Luffy in that sense. You know what I mean? Because it's a somewhat comparable character as far as their abilities have been explained thoroughly. Um, I don't. I don't. It just it didn't really bother me. And then because of the Lola stuff, and then now we're putting in all these other subplots that had to do with the Big Mom province in general. Big Mom being disposed away makes sense because they weren't going to overpower her. We've been talking about that for a minute, and Law being a better matchup to begin with. That was always my matchup from jump. Before we even knew about the rooftop was going to be a thing, any of that stuff. You guys, some of you know, even with my other channel, I've been talking about this matchup for years just because it just made sense to me. Um, for how their abilities function. You guys know I bring up those are my five, right? You know, those five that I always bring up. So when it started going down, it made a lot, it's just like, oh, okay, yeah, this is kind of what I thought. I didn't know what to think about what he'd be doing, right? Because his awakening, which for these paramecias, it just seems to be an inversion of what the normal abilities are. I just don't know how that would translate to Luffy. I mean, I know the obvious way it could. I just don't know. Just because we're seeing it done this way with Kid in Law, it doesn't necessarily guarantee Luffy's will work the same way, right? Um, it would be the notion that there's no way that Kid in Law have reached the point of awakening. Luffy isn't close. From a time standpoint, right? We talk about that all the time. Luffy's two biggest weaknesses aren't really his fault. It's just he hasn't been alive that long, right? And most of the characters in the series at the top tier that have fruit abilities, we know for a fact either through just straight up there, we know the date when they receive their ability, or something as subtle as like Aokiji and Akainu, who we know for a fact have had their abilities for at least 20 years because of the horror flashback. And Big Mom's the same way. She's had her fruit probably longer than anybody in the verse, as far as we know, just because of the how it was implied she came about gaining her abilities, and given her age now, that's pretty much like 50 something years of having a devil fruit. So that's why sometimes I understand why people think the way they do about what Big Mom has displayed, but I just think still she's a lot more, she's got, she's a lot more ferocious. It's just unfortunate in some aspects that for how she talked about Kaido, because that was something I was bringing up off and on, and because of what she thinks about reputation, right? Because that's what got her in trouble in the first place. Had she not cared about that kind of thing, which for obvious reasons the Yonko kind of have to a degree, right? When you're supposed to be a power and a force, you can't be looking bad, right? But she's so focused on it, it let her cloud her judgment, which is not her best characteristic to begin with, because it's never had to be. And that's something about her that I always talk about is, she's an enjoyable character, but she was never forced to mature in any kind of way, mentally speaking. She knows that she only thinks about what she wants and how does she have to get it. She found out earlier in life that strength gets you is a pretty good shortcut, right? But um, and then nothing about her life has ever forced her to have to mature. We don't really, other than her initial backstory, Big Mom's never been oppressed, other than the feeling, right, of losing her family at the time, right? But once those feelings went away and she just wanted to do what she wanted to do to create the world that she wanted to create, everything's always been about her. There's nobody to second guess her. She's not asking people for advice or any of those things. She just goes and finds what she thinks she needs, and if she wants it, she takes it. So when you're in a position like that, and then all your crew members are your children, so they're not going to really want to speak against you, right? Unless they're actually trying to take your throne. But we knew what nobody doing that. The only person smart enough, Katakuri, I would believe. I never had him beating Big Mom, but similar to Law, he can definitely outsmart her, and he probably has on a few occasions, during these tirades. I would imagine, in all his years, he's had to subdue Big Mom in some kind of way. He just if Queen could think of a way to do that, and Katakuri probably knows more about how she responds to certain things, he would probably have a better right shot of doing something similar. So that's kind of how I kind of viewed that. And Lost situation was similar with Kid because they just weren't gonna overpower her, right? I just didn't see that. And then with Kid, until he started utilizing right the more broken parts of his fruit, which we talked about, I just wasn't buying it the same way I don't buy it when Kaido's in full dragon form. I'm like, oh, okay, you must not be taking this serious yet because the best of what we've seen you can do is when you're not in this form. And the same thing with Kid. It's just like some of the stuff we talk about in the community. They bring it up in the story all the time. Especially if you notice with the kid in Law Banter during the Wano arc with stuff like with kids basically telling Law like, yeah, I thought you were one of Straw Hat's lackeys. We joke about that. Those things aren't put there like on accident. It's because they understand how interactions are being interpreted. I don't think that means that um, he necessarily cares all the time, right? Because he's still gonna do him. That's what makes it great, right? But at the same time, it's no different than whatever sport you follow, right? There's certain narratives between certain teams, Manchester U and Liverpool, stuff like that, Red Sox and Yankees, like certain fans, right? It's no different. The series is the same way, but it's just funny when you see it displayed through Kid and Law, right? Because he's talking about kids' abilities in this manner, basically telling him, what are you gonna make next? When he was joking on Kid, because it's just like that's the same stuff we say. You guys hear me bring that stuff up all the time. Like, dang, that's the same thing we said. And it's just crazy, man. It's just crazy to see that connection, right? Without directly talking to the people who bring us this series, because obviously it's older, but he don't do any of this alone. But it's just crazy the connection between people who don't necessarily talk to each other. And you see little stuff like that. And it made the fight a little bit more enjoyable with those little comments, especially stuff. Well, Law, man, Law, I told y'all, man, Law be pump faking all the time, man. It's the same guy who will lay in dead bodies to survive. He's not going to tell you 100% what his abilities are and what they can and cannot do. He's just not that guy, man. He's closer to a Hunter character. 100 characters under certain conditions, they're pretty much the exposition is for us and not the person who they talking to, just giving away their abilities, right? But Law was not gonna let Kid, just like how Kid was saying, is how do they translate it? You don't need to know what I'm packing or pause or whatever he said. I like those little things that was in that fight. I know I'm kind of getting on a tangent because I'm just thinking about that fight in its entirety, but the railgun. That was just mad dope, man. Because even though it didn't take Big Mom out, it's a very broken ability if you think of it in the context of other characters who aren't, you know, literally the top less than 1% in the entire verse as far as strength and durability is concerned. We don't know anybody stronger than and durable than Big Mom, and we don't know anybody else. So any like that's probably wiping people because think about what a railgun is, right? That's wiping people off the map. And then like we talked about at least a theory open about the SSG and how Delphi to apply the technology because if Kid can use his ability to power up something like his Viper beam for you cable fans out there to power up his hyper Viper beam or his proton cannon, however you want to word that, right? Then characters with energy based attacks or in that realm like a Kizaru, it still doesn't seem that far off anymore. So when I'm thinking about that and then the inclusion of the SSG and then at the time we weren't aware, like there was ideas about like how Rio functions now. Those ideas were out there because of what was done with the collars, right? Even back in the day. um an idea I had was like for pacifists to be more threatening. The only thing that would make them more threatening is if they could use hockey. But we know that they're not. We're still not sure on the interactions of non-living objects in hockey, right? That's why to me coding made a lot of sense, but at the same time it wasn't. Or how could I put this? It wasn't that crazy to me because with Conquerors in particular, if you think back to the Shank situation where we had hockey damaging physical objects, but we never seen hockey physically damage people before, up until rooftop, we had never seen that. The only thing we've seen it do is knock people out, and like I've explained, or at least my interpretation is it. Um, One of the reasons you can do that, and why hockey is a force multiplier, similar to or conquers hockey, just is a force multiplier, similar to Ren, like how you apply Ren, right? You're amplifying your aura. It's the same concept by that default, right? And conquers kind of boosts your other hockey. So I used to think the only way for you to, I won't say only, but being able to specifically designate who you knock out, right? That just seems like a skill of observation because it has to do with awareness and things of that nature. So that's kind of how I used to take it even before we got to this point in the story. That's just kind of been my mindset with that. And then now, like, so if you're applying conquerors to the point where before it only hurt people on a non-physical factor, right? It knocks people out, which in one note, you could say their will is being subdued, or you could just say they're being overstimulated. Similar to how when Luffy first used Gear 4, he couldn't control the bouncing. I used to just think he couldn't control it because it was overstimulation and trying to do too many different things. And mixing hockey with devil fruit, which was probably a new concept for him. Now it's not, obviously, but at the time, he couldn't. He just couldn't. It was funny. Like, I liked it, but it's the little the subtleties, like with the fruit abilities. Um, so thinking about those connections and how his fruit will like what will be. Actually, I just got lost in my thought right now, but I know I was talking about devil fruits. That's basically what I was leading to. With the Big Mom stuff, just seeing what she was doing with hers and how laws affect her and how kids function and what does that mean for later. Because for everything that we're seeing, we know these aren't going to be the most complex or the craziest attacks in the series by the time it's over. So some more hypeness is coming with that and some more mastery, right? Because of what hockey does and what we think it could do in the future now that we know coding functions the way it does. And I wish we would have got this a lot earlier in the story, maybe. I don't know, that's just a personal preference thing. But I think by the time hockey is going to matter, I mean, it matters now, but I don't know, I keep thinking that there's more to it than combat with this. The more and more we see it applied as a weapon, the more and more it makes me think. Because if you look at the characters with the strongest versions of it, they all have how do I want to word this? They have a non-physical aspect to them, right? Big Mom is not as focused as Kaido is, but the other aspect of her has to do with her fruit ability, right? And then with Kaido, he has this non-physical aspect with whatever's going on with his flashback and Rocksteady's back and Joy Boy and stuff like that. And I don't know, man. It's just wild to me. I've been thinking about some crazy stuff lately, particularly especially stuff like with Law, right? Because the okay, so here's the thing, because I'm about to say some crazy stuff. One of the things with Law that always gets talked about is ageless surgery, and we know from a mythology standpoint how important that is. At least the mythos within the series. I don't know of any mythos having to do with whatever it is that the age of surgery is or isn't. Um, the thing that gets overlooked is personality swap, and it hasn't been. He's only used it once, right? It's his least focused move, but and I'm only bringing this stuff up because all the crazy things involving Law with this, especially with Awakening. So we talked about before that for Law to be practicing Awakening, he would have to know or have some idea that the age of surgery and the Awakening don't necessarily have to correlate. And he could probably learn one without the other. And I've been more on this idea lately because of what we've seen from Conjuro. Um, the Cosmo, what it can do, and its ability to be a fire and be a ghost, and that whole situation is interesting. But what made it even more interesting is the Cosmo was still affected by Law's ability, and that the part that stood out to me. Not only like Big Mom tried to grab the Cosmo, but it couldn't. I don't know. I guess in one way it might have just been just because Big Mom, but I just thought it was crazy that because his I'm getting carried away. Anyway, here's my point. The way Dolphy mentioned personality swap, it was almost as if it's just as important. It's just not the most important. Or here's the other thing: maybe they work together on how you're supposed to use it. So let's take a non-devil fruit user. We have hailing in from the south side of the Shimosuki village. Y'all know there's never going to be an entire discussion I ever have here or the South Side of the Santerio doesn't get brought up at least once, right? I can't do it. It wouldn't be me. But let's take him for instance, right? So here we have Zoro, right? And then we have the Amber Led Assassin right here. We don't know if during this ageless surgery, well, we don't even know if it's real for one, but let's just assume that this is real. What would be the purpose of it besides immortality? Like, if I wanted to be immortal or ageless, does this, because it's right, a couple of questions. Is it you in your prime, or you stay at whatever form you are at that time, similar to sugar? Or is this a situation where it just slows down the age process? Or is the user's life essence, in which we know through Big Mom, is transferable in some way? If that is transferred into the new user and they just gain another amount of lifespan, and it's not really ageless, so to speak, it's just that the opie opie, and maybe, we didn't see Big Mom give other people life. I just had to assume if she wanted to, she could. I just don't know how that works though, because of the conflict of how her ability is supposed to work. But that just really pertains to homies. That we don't really know how that pertains to the lifespan part, right? Because as far as we know, there's no differentiation in her ability to take from devil fruit users. So even though soul and devil fruit are supposed to be connected, you would think she shouldn't be able to take lifespan from devil fruit users. But that's neither here nor there, right? So anyway, if I'm Law and I'm using the ability of the Aegis surgery, whatever that may be, on Zoro, what's stopping me from in the middle of the process and also using personality swap? Now, I don't know if the ability can be personality swap. I don't know if Law can use it on himself. I just think, why wouldn't he be able to? The problem would be, though, from the way personality swap looks and the interaction between Chopper and Sanji, that anything devil fruit related would not transfer to the new body. So it's like that's a really risky one, right? And then say you don't have to, the ability kills you, but only the body itself, and if you remain in the body, right? Say if he uses it towards the end of the process gets completed. Well, now Law is now the new host of Zoro's body, and now Zoro is in Law's dying body, and then just Law dies in place. Zoro dies in Law's body in place of him. Now, why you would do this again, I have no idea, but it should be possible, right? And here's the flip side to that, or you want to add a twist to this. If I have this ability used on me, odds are I don't want to use it on anybody else. If I know this much, I probably know about devil fruit transference, right? Now you see where I'm going with this. So it would make sense that if I wanted the ageless surgery used on me, now I have the option to consume the Opie Opie no Mi or not. Why that's a big deal is if you're truly ageless, although you still are vulnerable to certain things, you can no longer probably be drowned, similar to Jack, and what I assume to a degree with Kaido, where drowning him actually does it. He'll just sit there indefinitely. The same thing could occur, right? Until someone finds Law or pulls him out the water, something to that degree, he probably could survive indefinitely. The other part of this is because of the way his ability works, right? Gaining Yopi Yopi after the ages surgery. What happens if you use that ability again? You can't die if you're ageless, right? So I know it's getting kind of complicated with that, but that's just how far out I was thinking about that ability of the personality swap thing, and it's been sticking in my head a lot more. And then it's like, has this been done before, where someone's personality was swapped, and it stayed like that? And the other reason why I've been thinking about this is because the guy with Kinemon and Law. right? The gag of why King Mon is even still alive right now is because of Law. I don't think Law knew that to do that. He probably was just being careless at the time, or he probably is Kinemon, like, I don't care about this dude. You know what I mean? Um, I'm wondering if that's something that, I brought this up a couple of times. I just don't know how it would be applied and how it would be important. But that was one way I thought of it. I'm like, everybody has always thought using the age of surgery because of what we're told kills him. But if you add personality swap in, it's just like, okay, maybe that's what happened to Instant Messenger Simon. Maybe he or she, because I still don't know. Um, Maybe Instant Messenger Simon was the original user of Opie me. And it was something like with the goal say where they don't know everything about devil fruits, and at the time, in his quest to do whatever, if he's not Rocksteady's back or some kind of, I'm sure you've heard ideas like that before, but that was like what I was thinking. That could be the case, and then the personality swap, like, because everything about Lost Fruit for the most part does have to do with being a surgeon, except for the silence bubble to a degree. The only idea I could come up with that one is that, if you're a doctor or somebody doing intricate work like that, you would want a silent space to work in, so people don't startle you. You don't. You're trying to save somebody. You're not trying to kill them. With malpractice or something because you made a mistake. And I was thinking, I'm like, I wonder how long he's had this ability for, and is this similar to Red Hawk, where we now have. I mean, there have been hints to emotional based attacks in the series, right? Particularly now here in Wano with how uh, Odin's will has been portrayed to the scabbards, to where I still think Red Hawk has something to do with the Gomu Gomu. Like, I understand the symbolism behind it, obviously, but it could be a chance that the Law is similar to Luffy, right? He's in that bucket of characters that the Gorosei could be talking about for obvious reasons, right? Because that ties into Shanks too, and it also ties into the fact that Law saved Luffy and Marineford in a sense, and Shanks was okay with that. And we don't know the time period between the conversation when the Shanks and the Gorosei spoke, and then the chapter we just got recently with Zunisha and the Gorosei talking about devil fruits. And we really don't know if that conversation is happening in present tense. If you go by how it appears chronologically in the chapter, it would lead you to believe that it has something to do that conversation with the girl saying what's going on with Zunisha are related, but they don't really have to be in the slightest. They just happen to appear in that order. Uh, we've already heard stuff about things like that before, where panels get rearranged. Like, I'm pretty sure that's normal just as a writer in general. Stuff like that happens, but I'm not really sure if they're supposed to be related one for one through Zanisha, and it could just be Law because we know that Huang is watching all the fights, right? And from the way it appears, anybody who's inflicted with whatever that ability is, because we've seen it on animals and on humans. Because that one scrub dude on top of the rooftop who was watching the go with the coat, Luffy and the Kaido fight, he was watching it, and he had one of those marks on him. And because that information was being reported back to the Gorosei, because they were, before Derby had Cypher Pole Guy and Dr. Seuss Man Cypher Pole Guy left, they were supposed to be retaining information about what's going on in the fights back to the WG. So I just wonder if when they were talking about awakening, they saw Law use awakening on Big Mom or something weird like that. And even though the Opie by default is broken, but it could be a situation like the arc whose name we don't speak from Bleach, where the ability of having full domain over a dimension, right? Because if you think about how Shock Will worked, most of his attacks with Law don't seem to cause quote unquote physical damage, right? But it was able to physically damage the ground with electricity of all things. Like, it went straight down from Onigashima all the way down to the ground on Wano. I don't know. And if you think about how Room, like these variations of Room now that he's using, the silent bubble makes no sense. like it's cool as a symbolism, but from his ability, like I said, other than the surgeon theme of quiet, it's just a weird ability. And then extending the sword, using room to extend the sword, that's wild to me because he's either replacing air with the I don't know what he's doing, to be honest. I used to think Law should be able to fly. That's how crazy I used to get with his abilities. Because if you think about how he throws the rock most of the time, Dwayne Johnson, and replaces himself for teleport, however, which whatever word you prefer. Why hasn't he? Why can't he do that with air molecules? Like we see with Python, you can interact with air and things of that nature in the verse. And you would think with how he does surgeries, including when he opened Luffy up, I'm assuming he had to remove parts of his chest, right? Because of the Red Dog himself, my man, Akainu, number four of my favorite characters in the series. He's part of my top five. Zoro, Law, Akainu, Big Bob, and of course Go to Curry. You know what I mean? Uh, Somewhere in that area, obviously, maybe top 10. That's a hard one. I haven't thought about that in a while, but yeah, that's just what made it weird for me. And then, like I said, thinking about this stuff with Law and his potential connections to Sword, like I know people, it's kind of hard not to have him in that group. Even one because of his path and what he's trying to accomplish, and two, there's like the little hint, like one that sticks out used to stick out to me when we first learned about Sword was the way Kobe and X Drake talked to each other was the exact same way Corazon and Sengoku talked to each other. Even the whole part about messing up the code, because like Sengoku's name was like Crackers or something. Because I don't, and that has something to do with him and Garp always eating rice crackers and stuff. And Corazon was supposed to be cookies, and then he messed it up or something like that when they was talking on the Denden Mushi, and Law was sitting there when he was rolling him in a rowboat. They did the same thing, see and miss with Kobe. So it's like I don't know if it doesn't necessarily mean they're all connected, but I just find it odd that all the stuff having to do with Law and what we know about Sword, they all kind of tied to him. The X-ray thing ties to him. Kobe, because of the Rocky Port incident that we don't know, ties to him. This situation with Luffy is like I'm not saying he's a bad guy or he did anything to Luffy in a negative way, but I wouldn't be surprised if another joke with Kinemon actually ends up being serious, like in that way how it was, where personality swap or something he did to Luffy. I know we've talked about that before, but I hadn't thought about that in a while until I seen how his awakening worked against Big Mom. I don't know. So I just wanted to chop it up with y'all for a few about stuff I've been thinking about, with just mostly on Luffy. I don't even need to get into the rest because we have a chapter coming out tomorrow, so we'll probably get into that. I just didn't forget about y'all. I got a bunch of other stuff coming. It just depends on my free time as usual. Anyway, that's just my mind's been everywhere. And then too, I've been rereading Hunter x Hunter again, so uh, I have some interesting ideas on how to explain with Luffy later that helps explain an old theory about him. And we'll probably talk about that tomorrow. So, yeah, peace, y'all.